Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker. Today we have episode 461 for December 29th, 2025. I hope everybody is having a great holiday season and taking some time off and relaxing and spending some time with loved ones. I know I will be doing that. And we've got another best of episode for you today. But today, instead of taking clips from the podcast that I did throughout the last year, things that you have already heard if you've been a listener for the last year, I'm actually going to take snippets this time from the bonus podcast. This is the stuff that I do for my patrons, part of the perks of being a patron, where I keep my interview guests on for another, 15, 20 minutes or so, sometimes longer, and ask them some more personal questions or some more tangential questions. And these are things that, unless you're a patron, you've never heard. And so I want to give you a little taste of that today, a little bit of a sampler platter of what some of those bonus interviews sound like and some of the extra questions that I ask. And maybe give you a little taste of what it's like for you to be a patron. You can become a patron at any time. If you go to fdsd.me/support, you'll find a link to Patreon. There's different levels of which you could become a patron. But there's a lot of really cool perks. I've got a Discord server where we chat, and you can directly message with me and some other patrons. We have some interesting discussions there. But I've also got these two bonus podcasts. They're really all part of the same stream, but depending on what level patron you are, you either get one or two. The main one is where I do bonus Q&A with the interview guests. I've got another one called Merlin's Musings, which is for my higher level patrons, which tends to get more technical. And I was going to include a snippet here, and I looked through them all from the last year. And they're all kind of long, like they tend to run 20 to 30 minutes long. And so I didn't really have room to bring a whole one into here. But just to give you a little flavor of some of the things that I covered, I did a 3-part series last year that I called The Secret Life of Metadata. And I walked you through how metadata is embedded into files, how you can find metadata embedded in your files, and then how you can delete that metadata or try to at least delete some of that metadata. I talked about the Subaru hack. I went into some of the details about that. I talked about error correcting codes. That's actually something I did as part of my master's degree way back when. I talked about how AirTags work. I even did a little thing about secret yellow printer dots. And yes, that is actually a thing. It's how Reality Winner was caught. And that was an interesting 2-part episode where I basically wanted to prove to myself that they were there and tried to decode them myself. I had a color laser printer. And sure enough, I found them. Those yellow dots were there and they were in a pattern. And so I kind of went through my investigation process on those. So that's just a little overview of the kind of things I do for Merlin's Musings. They're kind of random, which is why I called it Musings. And sometimes it's also behind the scenes stuff, like I gave my personal readout on my ShmooCon experience. But I couldn't really find any of those that were well contained enough to put a sample in here. But that's an idea of the kind of things that I cover on that bonus podcast for my top patrons. So anyway, today I picked some choice nuggets, some gems from the last year from the bonus podcast, the extra Q&A that I did with some of my interview guests, to give you a little bit of taste of that. And this will be brand new content for most of you. I will be doing a new patron promotion in January, so stay tuned for more information about that. But for now, let's get into some of my bonus Q&A with my top interview guests from the past year. This first clip is from Yael Grauer, and she's an amazing person. And it turns out I've been reading her stuff for many years and didn't really pay attention. I try to actually look at bylines a lot more now than I used to. And she's written for many different outlets, big name outlets, including Wirecutter, which we're going to talk about a little bit here. But I remember I was looking for VPN reviews, and they're notoriously bad. Most of the VPNs have consolidated under single companies. Like multiple VPNs that you've heard of are actually owned by the same parent company. Turns out a lot of the VPN sites are actually owned by the same companies. So VPN marketing can be really sketchy. And this Wirecutter review that I found back in the day, I was really impressed by their methodology and how they actually focused a lot on privacy and not just speed and number of servers and that kind of thing that's more common with a lot of VPN reviews. But like, are they private? Like, do they log your activity, for example? Have they had an audit by a third party? And I tell you what, I do not envy people who write these reviews, especially VPN reviews, because these companies it's really cutthroat. Like they can be really vicious. And if they don't like your review, they will push back in lots of direct and indirect ways. So I was curious about this, and I asked her experience with reviewing VPNs. Another thing you've done a lot of work with, and we touched a little bit on the show, was VPN stuff. And I love the way that you covered VPNs with Wirecutter. I recommended that article all over the place when I read it, and I just now realized it was you. So I think it was really, for me, it was, like I said, it was like the first mainstream review that I'd seen that actually really talked about the realities of privacy in the VPN space and why it's so hard to make a good VPN recommendation. Take me back. How did that come about? What was the story behind that write-up? And I'm curious, did you get pushback at all from, like, as you published the good and the bad or whatever? Did anybody push back and say, hey, that's not right, or whatever?
Yeah. Oh, that's fun. So the way that it started, it was actually really funny because I was really hesitant to do that article because I had written a story for ours. I was supposed to do VPN reviews for ours, but I ended up writing a story about why it was difficult. And
and I read most of that. That was, very interesting. I'm
like trying to do these reviews, and I'm like, it turns out this is really complicated because there's no independent audits, which is one of the things that I pushed for in Wirecutter. But by the time Wirecutter was looking for this, they were like, oh, we actually want someone to do reviews, but you could pick how you review these VPNs. And I was like, the industry is kind of mature. There are audits now. But yeah, the Ars Technica article came from, actually it was Dan Guido at Trail of Bits, like spent an hour with me explaining all these nuances of VPNs. And so I feel like this is when journalists and hackers can work really closely together, because he gave me a ton of really good information that I was able to kind of amplify that was already common knowledge in those spaces, but I don't think anybody had really written it, at least the way that I did. And then, ours is kind of technical, but it's not like technical documentation.
Right.
So then I was like, I just said I couldn't review VPNs, and here I am about to review VPNs. So I was really worried that it would be horrible or somebody would yell at me or something. But actually people really liked it, which was really cool. The biggest pushback I got actually was that we reviewed VPNs. So there's a belief among some in this community that you should not use any tools in the 5 eyes or 9 eyes or 14 eyes countries.
Right, yeah.
But to me, that means you're in a country that doesn't have meaningful consumer protections, maybe. Like I don't think it's a good thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there are trade-offs, right? It's not straightforward.
Yeah, I'm like, do I want to use a VPN in a country that is outside of the rule of law, or is arguing that it's outside of the rule of law? Like, we have this. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like VPN companies are always going to push back. Like, we also went to do a project. We worked with Roy and Safi and some of our students at University of Michigan, and we reviewed, and then our own testing team, led by Steve Blair, to review VPNs for Consumer Reports. And there's always going to be pushback. A lot of the report that we did for Consumer Reports is me kind of implying that certain marketing copy is potentially misleading, and the VPN's explaining why they don't think it is. And I'm like, cool, yeah, people can decide for themselves whether they buy these arguments or not. But I think, yeah, of course, there's always people who think we would have done better on your ratings if the ratings were different. We don't have an audit, but if you didn't ask for that, but only asked for open source, we would have done better. Or if
I remember that being one of the things in the article. I was like, wow, they actually, I think you actually said in the article, normally this would be at the top of the list, but they don't have any audits. So they're out. That was it. One criteria, they don't do audits. I can't recommend them. And I thought that, wow, I'd never seen that. I don't think I'd seen that before in a review.
Yeah. Thank you. That all stems from a conversation with Dan many years ago, but yeah, it was cool. But yeah, no, I was actually, yeah, the VPNs are they can have pretty aggressive marketing. There was actually somebody who did VPNs reviews who did a whole video about how my review was biased. And it was really funny because it was, when I went to Consumer Reports, I stopped updating the Wirecutter guide, and I turned it over to David Huerta, but I think my byline was still on it. And even though there was vastly different tests and criteria, it was the same VPN that did well in both reports. So some guy made a whole video, which I thought was really funny because David was like, how come he didn't mention me in this hate video? And I'm like, is this really what you're upset about? But yeah, he made a whole video about how he thought we tweaked the test to try to get the results that we needed. And I'm like, that's interesting. But I think sometimes people who don't get a lot of traffic or publicity for their work try to take on something they see as authoritative to like get paid for. Like he was always like messaging me on social, and I'm like, I know what you're doing, and I'm just going to block you because they're trying to kind of. And I'm like, no, I really stand behind what we wrote in our report. But we definitely got pushback from VPNs. Though sometimes there was one VPN that pushed back a lot in their own subreddit, and it was kind of fun because their own subscribers were telling them they were wrong. So I remember seeing that like way after the fact. Somebody sent me a link, and I'm like, huh, okay. But they were trying to say like, oh, she hasn't reviewed VPNs before, and I'm like, oh, that's your criteria, because a lot of times if people can't attack your arguments on their merit, they'll like go for identity attacks.
Sure.
And I'm like, huh, interesting, okay. Like, so yeah, that happened.
All right, next up, I've got a clip from my interview with Josh Summers, who runs the really good website, All Things Secured. I really like his content. He's got a great delivery, and he covers some really good topics. And I asked him, like I often do with my guests when I get them into the bonus Q&A, what's your origin story? How did you get into this field? Why is privacy so important to you? What drove you to do what you're doing? And I got to say, this is probably the scariest origin story I've ever heard. It's really quite shocking. And it's because he lived in China for a while, and I'll let him tell the story, but he went through a pretty harrowing experience there, and it led him to start All Things Secured and help other people avoid mass surveillance. Because I'm telling you, the story that we're about to hear about his experience in China could happen anywhere today. I mean, we think of China as having mass surveillance, but today we've all got mass surveillance. And the only reason this is not happening maybe to you right now is because your government has chosen not to use it against you so far. Okay, I'm not trying to be a fearmonger here, but I just want you to understand this is important, and this should give you a little taste of why. What got you into this? What made you start getting privacy? You said it was because you were in China, so you told us a little bit about that. But was that all that triggered it for you? Was there anything else in your life that maybe drove you to? I mean, it's one thing to do it for yourself, like you said. It's another thing to say, well, you know what? I got to spread the word, do this for other people. That's not something that most people do.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a story, Carrie, and it's going to sound fantastic and unbelievable, but I promise you this is 100% true. So this is the story of my exit from China, and this is what really propelled things for me, because things took a turn for the worst in our part of China over the past basically 10 years. It's been really, really bad. And we were finding ourselves under an intense surveillance state. Right. So I'm not joking when I say that there was a little police, what we would call it a substation. It wasn't really big, but a police substation probably every 100 meters on the road. They wanted to be able to, they were worried about rioting. I'm not sure. They just wanted to control the population in this part of the world in Xinjiang. And so there were facial recognition cameras everywhere. There were these police substations. There were places where they were plugging into our phone. And me being I can only say naive foreigner, like I started my whole journey of online content creation and everything in the travel space, right? I worked with Lonely Planet back when that was actually a thing.
Oh, yeah.
And
wait, they're no longer a thing?
Well, they are, but you ask anybody under the age
Lonely
of
Planet guides, yeah, okay.
Yeah, you ask anybody under the age of 20, they don't know what Lonely Planet is, right?
Okay, sure.
And but anyway, so I would run around this region with a camera, right? And talking with people, making notes about stuff. Like it was a lot of fun, but I can see now looking back why they looked at me and they thought I was a spy. They genuinely thought that I was a spy. So they took me in, and my wife and I went through 17 days of intense interrogation where we were, we had our passports taken from us. I had all of my devices. They came into my apartment, they sat me on the couch, and they spent an hour rummaging through my apartment and pulling, every SD card from a camera. They took my Wi-Fi router, they took phones, and for 17 days they had access to all my devices, rummaging through that, and then bringing me in for questioning. And during that time, it was very eye-opening for me to hear them ask me questions. Why did you talk to this person in December of last year? Why did you do all that? And it was, whoa, I did not realize that you guys were like really tracking me. Like, yeah, I see the cameras, But I just figure, they just access that data. Like, I don't think you're really that smart to be able to connect the dots and all this stuff. But it was a super eye-opening experience for me. Very scary because I thought they were going to end up putting me in jail. Thankfully, I mean, that's what they were threatening me with. Thankfully, at the end of the day, they decided I just wasn't much of a threat. They handed my wife and I passports and said, you're not allowed back. So we're not able to travel back into China. And I left that experience being like, wow, I really want to make sure, not that I think that this is ever going to happen again, but I've like seen behind the curtain of what is tracking and what they care about. I want to secure myself a little better. I value privacy a little bit more, and I'd like to help my mom and my dad and my sister and people that I care about do the same thing, because you never know when that type of information might be useful to a government that then wants to get it from us, And so that was really the instigator of, I'd started in VPNs, like I said in our previous conversation. I started in VPNs because I wanted to bypass censorship. But I got really into privacy and security, and I actually changed everything. I had put up information on my travel site about, hey, if you travel to China, here's how to use a VPN, here's how to get around all that stuff. And then I altered that and put it, into its own brand, All Things Secured, once I was like, wow, this is actually something that I care about. So that was, I know you didn't know this coming into this, but that's my story.
Next up, I've got another clip from Lisa LaVasseur. I say another because I also pulled one of her clips in the previous Best Of episode. But in the bonus Q&A with Lisa, we talked about this notion of business identity resolution. And I had posed this as I would like an app on my phone that will be able to tell me who owns all the other apps on my phones and if that owner ever changes, because it happens more often than you'd think. And a lot of times apps are built by a small set of developers who then sell out to a bigger company. And at that point of sale, things can go really sideways because the new company can all of a sudden decide to monetize the existing users of that app. And in a lot of cases, they just milk it for money, like suck it to a dry husk and then abandon it. And so who owns the app that you're using is an important thing to know. And Lisa had some very interesting ideas about this, and they at Internet Safety Labs are working on this. And again, check out their app microscope tool, appmicroscope.org, and keep checking back because they are going to be adding some stuff in the future. And Internet Safety Labs is just doing some amazing work that you haven't heard a lot about yet, but I hope you will hear a lot more about soon. And certainly I will be letting you know. But for now, let's learn a little bit about identity resolution platforms, which they use against us, and how she is proposing we do something similar with the businesses that own and run these apps and services. I really would like some way to, let's say, on my phone to say, look at all the apps I've got, and then tell me what's wrong with them, and then maybe notify me if something changes with the apps that I currently have installed, including what I really want to know is if the owner changes. Because I've seen a lot of cases lately where somebody sells out, or the owner of an SDK that is included in an app sells out, and the owner changes, and I want to know that because a lot of times the people who buy them out want to monetize that data whereas the original owner didn't. That's a pipe dream. Is there any hope of having a tool like that?
There is, and here's the infrastructure that we need to build, and we need to get funded to build this. Okay, so I mentioned identity resolution platforms, and identity resolution platforms are part of the commercial surveillance infrastructure that identifies us no matter what, cookies be damned. That's the way to think about it. Like, this is the workaround for the removal of third-party cookies. So identity resolution platforms exist to basically figure out that user 123 from LinkedIn is the same as user 456 from Facebook.
Okay, so fingerprinting.
You can call it fingerprinting. I know this threw me. I was like, what? Like, anyway, yeah. Yes, it's a kind of fingerprinting. It's identity resolution. It's resolving two potentially different sets of data to a single actual human being using either statistical, probabilistic methods or deterministic methods. And it is a science, and it is a thing, and it's been around for a surprisingly long time, and this infrastructure exists in a very mature fashion. So there are things like these identity graphs. I'm getting to the answer of your question. I'm just taking a very long way around it. There are identity graphs for you, me, and everybody else in the world. Our identity graph that shows that I am user 123 over here, 456 over here, whatever. And it's that kind of knowledge, right? That 360-degree knowledge. And there are many, like surprisingly many of these entities that do this. LiveRamp does this. We spoke about LiveRamp being on the Power School board. Yeah. So it's neat. It's very neat technology. Wouldn't it be really neat if we had that for businesses?
Yes.
We need business identity graphs, and we need them yesterday. And our job at ISL would be really, really benefit from such a thing. And I want to build this thing because we have the start of it. And there are entities like open corporates. There are platforms out there that list open business information, but it does change all the time. And, it's so funny you asked this particular question because we just came up internally of like, okay, when we test an app, we found a domain that is clearly with like a company that was bought and acquired out of existence is what we say. They've been completely subsumed by another entity. So we have company entries for everybody, for all of them. But who do we say that domain belongs to? Do we say it's the company that was bought and completely subsumed and no longer has any visible presence to anybody except for the acronym in this subdomain over here? Or do we just say we leapfrog to who the current owner is right now and say that's the owner of it? But then we lose that history so it's a real thing. And like just having the ability to have all of that information, that fingerprint, if you will, of the company is a piece of infrastructure that I am very eager to build in whatever way we can.
I've interviewed Josh Corman several times now, and I've had the pleasure of hanging out with him and meeting him in other contexts as well, usually at cyber conferences. And he never fails to hard reset me on the things that we need to be doing right now. I, like a lot of people in cybersecurity, think about long-term stuff. And the question I started with in this bonus Q&A with Josh is, should we be using memory-safe languages? And for the record, yes, absolutely. We should be using memory-safe languages. Something like 70 to 80% of the vulnerabilities in our software today can be traced back to some sort of a memory bug. And there are modern computer languages that just don't have those problems. And we should be migrating as much of our code to memory-safe languages as possible. But you got to understand that Josh's timeline is way shorter than that. He's part of Undisruptible 27. He was part of I Am the Cavalry before that. And his focus is on 2027 and what can we get done in the next 2 years to make us more resilient and be able to take that first punch when somebody, in this case, we're thinking China, tries to disrupt American life by attacking critical infrastructure. So you have to understand that severely limits the amount of things that you can get done and totally changes where you should be focusing your efforts. And that is the nature of this little snippet from my bonus Q&A with Josh Corman. In addition to eliminating, bad practices, which I think was a great focus that you brought, should we be mandating or at least maybe incentivizing efforts like in the engineering community, like moving to memory-safe languages? That just seems like a no-brainer to me. Or, passkeys and MFA. I mean, there are lots of low-hanging fruit, simple things that we already have solutions for that we just don't seem to be adopting.
I'm going to give you a contradictory response to this, okay?
Okay.
And look, you've known me for a little while, and people can look at my bio. Like, a lot of what you see in Secure by Design, Secure by Default comes from my rugged software stuff, my rugged, DevOps stuff. Like, some of the Cavalry language is lifted almost word for word in some of the Secure by Design. I'm a passionate advocate for AppSec, product security, Rise of the Chief Product Security Officer. I teach it for CMU. So I'm all on board for a lot of those concepts. And anything you do to advance those this year or next year is not going to help a single water facility.
Oh, sure.
Not even one. So a couple sobering things you realize when you get past platitudes or advice or song jingles is, okay, let's do MFA, right? Who would disagree with MFA? Well, there's a ton of pressure sensors along gas and fluid pipes. Does each one send an alert for MFA? To whom? There's thousands of these sensors sometimes in an environment. So not everything needs MFA. Not everything is practical to put MFA on, even if it supported MFA, which they don't. Some of these are 20 years old. They're programmable logic controllers. They're just a sensor. They're not even an actuator. So things need to be fit for purpose. So we platitude a lot of MFA. It's so easy. Sometimes MFA is really, really hard. Sometimes. So I don't want to be an apologist for the status quo either, because the status quo is quite dangerous. I think that it's easy to have slogans, but I think we need to meet people where they are, understand their environment, help them know what we know, and then come up with practical ways to segment, isolate, layer, defense, etc., within their means, within their talent pool, within their consequence management. And we too often start with the control without context. So should we do a lot of those things? Probably. But memory safe languages are way over indexed versus actual threat context. If it's easier to do, we should. We should train it. We should teach it. Forward development. We're not missing controls in many cases, though. We're really missing incentives. There's still no liability. There's still no accountability. Most of these sectors have no minimum cyber hygiene. They have lobbyists that are successfully preventing minimum hygiene. Some of these worst ones, like water, have zero requirements. And some of them have zero money and zero margins, especially at the rural level.
Yeah,
so
right.
we took the benefits of connectivity, but we haven't paid the bill. We haven't paid the cost.
Right.
So
Well,
I think it's going to be a yes and
Sure.
anybody that says just do zero trust, just do secure by design. And let's be honest, I mean, some of the people who signed the secure by design pledge are frequent offenders on the known exploited vulnerabilities list and should be shamed out of the marketplace in some cases. So unfortunately, sometimes the security product you buy to keep the bad guys out is what lets the bad guys in. And that has got, we have to start holding each other accountable in this industry before we start asking more of the owners and operators as well. So we don't deserve the trust that we're asking, them to play their part in. So yes, you're right about MFA where applicable, usually on edge technologies or administrative controls. You're right about memory safe languages sometimes, but in these particular cases, they're coming in through a Chinese manufactured TP-Link router without being hacked. Right? If your enemy wants to blow up your water facilities and you gave them the key to the front door, they are in fact the front door, like that is not going to be fixed with memory safe languages or MFA.
Well, I will take this opportunity to tell people to read Ghost Fleet, which which speaks to that.
It's free.
And to your previous point, I think that what seems to be overlooked a lot, and in a lot of cases can be a simple and often no-cost thing, is to reduce risk by eliminating old stuff that's no longer supported, closing doors that you don't need, taking out products you don't need, simplifying. You're lowering your attack surface by just making it simpler or removing something entirely.
Yeah, if you talk to someone who's not selling you something, the longer you've been in security, you'll hear something along the lines of this. The best way to improve your security is not by adding something, it's by removing something. Right? It's complexity is the enemy of all things. So if you can reduce elective complexity, elective attack surface, elective exposure, legacy technology that can't be patched or updated even in an emergency, that's bad. That's one of those bad practices. Hard-coded passwords. Bad. I only had 3 bad practices I wrote. CISA.gov/bad practices. There's only 3. And they're everywhere in water facilities. Everywhere, right? It's unsupported stuff, hard-coded password stuff, single-factor remote administration stuff. Those are everywhere. That would be a great place to start. If you want sequels to that, the CISA published this thing called the Cross-Sector Cyber Performance Goals. It's a subset of the NIST cybersecurity framework. That is usually where you want to begin. So whenever you would ask NIST, which ones do I do if I'm starting? They're like, all of it. I'm like, well, what if I'm a small, medium business with no talent? Oh, it's good for them too. They should do all of it. So this was the White House telling CISA to say, irrespective of the industry you're in, they came up with 38 things, which is maybe still too ambitious, but it's the basics like, do you know what you have? Mm-hmm. Do you avoid known exploited vulnerabilities? Mm-hmm. Are you running end-of-life unsupported operating systems on the edge of your network? So there is a way out of the hole we've dug. It's just going to be a long, hard slog. In the meantime, we want to engineer down the consequences. Expect compromise, engineer down the consequences.
Andy Liddell is somebody else that I met at one of the Washington, D.C. privacy parties. It was a private dinner party that I was at with some other amazing privacy people. And that particular dinner party was very interesting. The people that were there, and I can't really disclose much more than that, but like I actually watched some really fantastic collaboration between a disparate group of people around privacy topics on some really consequential stuff. Again, I was lucky enough to be invited to this, and Andy was there, and this was the first time I'd met him, even though he and I had been already talking about doing this interview, but I hadn't met him yet, and so I had a chance to meet him in person, which was great. And Andy and his wife have a law practice together that's called EdTech Law Center, EdTech being short for education tech. And you can see their active cases if you go find their website. A lot of them involving the use of Chromebooks in schools. And they're focused on exposing how our kids today, particularly as students, are being exploited and their data is being collected and misused. So I asked him, because I know he's got kids, how he teaches his kids about the value of privacy. And he had some very interesting points to make. What advice do you give your kids? How do we talk to our kids about privacy? Because they don't, like you said before in the podcast, they don't have maturity. They don't have the perspective that we have that would let them understand how important these things are. So what are we to do? How can we impress upon them in a way they understand how privacy works?
Well, so we first try and teach them the value of privacy, that you deserve privacy. You deserve a space that's yours, and you deserve private thoughts that are yours. And so just the way that we try and treat our kids and raise them with like that level of respect and dignity, that's the baseline, right? And so I try very hard to extend and give them opportunities in the real world that might sound kind of radical to certain listeners, but basically saying, you and your friends, why don't you guys walk across the neighborhood? We live in Central Austin in a very urban neighborhood, but here's $20 to go get some ice cream, and without me. And I'm not going to track you. I'm not going to give you a phone. I'm not going to give you, a little air tag.
And you can't DoorDash the ice cream.
Right. No, it's like you all need to walk down there and do it yourselves, right? And that gives me a little bit of heartburn, honestly, because it's like we do live in urban Austin, and I see how cars drive on our street, but I have to think like, well, safety in numbers, there's 4 of them going at a time, there's 5 of them going at a time, and they can handle this. And I believe in them. Even though it's a little bit scary for me, I want them to know that this is a thing that they can do. And as part of that, I'm not tracking their every move while they do it. And so that's one way that we look at it. And, it's like even just thinking about like going into the rooms, knocking before we go in, and just trying to instill this idea that like we all are entitled to a private life, even from your parents, right? And it's like, obviously you have a much smaller entitlement to that as a kid, but there's still bounds to it, right? And so really trying hard to reject this helicopter parenting model that I think, for a lot of good reason, people are sort of bootstrapped into, but being very intentional about our interactions with the kids in order to lay the groundwork of, well, these companies online don't care about any of that, and so what they really want to do is find your most embarrassing moments and private moments and darkest thoughts and vulnerable periods of your life and use all of that stuff against you forever. That's really what they want to do. And so once you know that, then I would hope that you would make the choice to put less of that information out there voluntarily yourself. And so, the kids, and this is the benefit of starting an activist law firm, all friends' parents know about us, right? And so people, are respectful of our parenting choices and curious about them. And, we're in a community where with a lot of like-minded people, even to the point where it's like, I've got people kind of even more extreme than me when it comes to media and video games and stuff, like no TVs in the house, period. Wow. No video games, period. And it's like, man, one of my favorite things to do is family movie night and playing Switch with my kids. Yeah. Right. And so, but I think the point is there are a lot of ways to do it and trying to be respectful of other people's parenting choices, but then also giving the kids something else. Right. And so the kids know you guys are not getting a phone anytime soon, and you're certainly not getting social media ever, as far as I'm concerned. But in exchange, we're going to give you other things. I'm going to give you the opportunity to go across the neighborhood with your pals and get ice cream. I'm never going to say no to having your friend over for dinner. I'm never going to say no to a sleepover. I will drive you all over Austin so that you can have in-person relationships with your friends, because those are harder and harder to have. And unless you're really intentional about them, they're not going to happen. And I think when you think about, the biggest invaders of privacy are social media platforms. And the reason kids are on those is because they're trying to fill a need that's not being met, which is this human desire to be together. And so I think, well, let's just be together. And it doesn't need to be mediated. It doesn't need to be online. It just needs to be physically present together. And so, it's just making these other choices that may not seem like they have much to do with privacy, but they're really informed by that privacy lens of, I want you all to know real human connection. And I want to make that absolutely possible for you to experience that as much as you can while you're young.
Probably no surprise that I've got a clip here from Deviant, who is a physical penetration expert. In other words, a lockpicker and a safe cracker and many other things. And he does plenty of international travel, and he's a really smart and crafty security guy. And so in my bonus Q&A with him, I figured I had to ask him about what his international travel tips are. And I was actually doing some international travel myself around that time, and I had been doing my own research into it and really didn't like what I found. It's gotten bad. And honestly, as a US citizen, it's gotten bad for me returning to my own country. And I know it can be tricky to navigate this situation going to other countries too. And we have tech with us all the time, our phones at least, and often maybe an iPad or even a laptop, certainly if we're traveling for work. I was more interested in traveling personally, but we talk a little bit about both of that here. And he had some interesting advice, and so I thought it would be good to include that in our best of episode. It's gotten really scary now crossing borders, and I mean my border. I mean coming home. It's gotten to the point where I'm worried about what devices and things I carry with me. And I've done some research on this, and none of the answers I found are good. You could take a burner for them, but then that raises suspicion as well, might invite further attention. There seems to be no good answers. I'm just curious because this is becoming, I think, a real problem these days. Do you have any personal OPSEC tips for somebody doing international travel?
Yeah. Reminder to anyone who is listening, and again, we want to set people's threshold of worry at the right level. As a U.S. citizen, you cannot be denied entry currently until we have a constitutional crisis.
You
cannot be denied entry.
Qualify that.
Right? You can be stopped, you can be detained, you can be hassled. And I don't know how long that hassle will take. If you're a person who looks like me, it will not take as long as someone who doesn't look like me. And that's a sad reality of racism and stuff. But you have to be eventually let into the country. Now, they don't have to let you in with your stuff. They can keep your luggage. They can keep your laptop. They can keep your phone for reasons. Like, they don't have to tell you why.
Right.
That means that if you I have my one laptop and it has the only copies ever of this family photo album that I've been working on since Grandma died. First of all, back that shit up in the cloud, please, somewhere.
Yeah.
But also, if you have if I am without my laptop, it will be a life-altering event, and I'll be down for a week, and I don't have the ability to get my business running. I have to reprovision all my email, my keys, and my accounts, and my instances, and all my passwords. Don't take that laptop overseas.
Yeah.
Take a cheap burner, like a beater laptop, not a burner laptop. Again, burner is one of those terms that people love to throw around. Take a cheap laptop that has the things you need on it, which is probably half the time just a browser, because we do everything in a browser nowadays.
Yeah.
And yes, maybe you don't have your full Outlook instance with all your calendars. Maybe you don't have your full access to, I'm not posting on Instagram when I go overseas because I'm not logged in. But you're able to conduct the bare minimum of what you can do overseas. And on the way in, if you get stopped and they say, what's on this? First of all, you never unlock anything. You never, ever have to unlock anything. They cannot make you unlock anything with a passcode or a passphrase. That will not ultimately harm your ability to get into the country. You say no. And by the way around that, I could hold up my laptop in front of me or my cell phone in front of me to the camera to you here. Like, I've talked about stickers. There's a sticker on all of our devices that literally says, this laptop is not owned by this individual. This is company property. The individual is not allowed to surrender this device without talking to counsel first. And having that form, having that on a device, gives you a little, I say, no, talk to my company's attorney. I can't do anything for you, man. And if they take it, they take it. But you got into the country, and then immediately call a lawyer because you say, what the hell was that? Why was I just subject to that experience at the border? Because you're never just going to have like, oh, wasn't that scary? That one thing that happened. I'm sure the government will never be interested in me ever again. No, your radar should be up at that point. But yes, having devices that have whole disk encryption and that you don't mind, if you had to, losing that device. You'll eventually get it returned to you 6 months later, possibly broken, out of date. And then I wouldn't trust it. I would never boot it up ever again.
Yeah, right. Yeah, sadly.
Yeah, wipe it and eBay it, I guess. But yeah, that's one thing I would say. Don't give more information than is asked. And if you're not familiar with, if you're not an American citizen, or if you're going to a country where you're not a citizen, be very mindful of labor laws. There are loads of people who talk themselves into trouble at the border when they say, I'm here, why are you coming here as a tourist visa? I knew someone who literally was going to like help an art installation. They were going to some big music and arts festival. And it was just, it was a bunch of burner type people. And they were going to the UK. And she was like going to paint with friends in like a London flat before they did this art. And she was like, oh, I'm helping my friend. And they said she was working in the country, even though she wasn't getting paid. And she never got in the country. She got detained and this whole mess and lawyers were involved. If you're there as a tourist, you're there as a tourist. No, I'm not working. Why are you here? I'm here to experience your beautiful country. Yes. Don't lie to people. If you're actually going there to live and work for 6 months, you should probably have talked to somebody about what that looks like. And I realize the world's a complicated place, but you don't have to give more information than is offered. And you're talking to people who are professionals at eliciting information and making you uncomfortable. Having that little sticker, that little script, you could say, this isn't my device. This is my work's device. I'm not allowed to unlock it. Talk to the lawyer.
I always have such a good time talking with Carissa Véliz. She's a philosophy professor, and I was an electrical engineer back in the day. And when I was at Purdue, some of my electives that I took were philosophy classes, and they were some of my favorite classes. Someday I hope to meet Carissa in person, and maybe we can do some philosophizing. But anyway, we have some conversations here in this bonus podcast where I express my concern over giving agency to AI systems. And then we talked about the idea of like a techlash, a backlash against big tech, and whether kids today might actually be shunning screens and trying to turn away from spending all their lives with technology. And she had a great little suggestion for a way to defy big tech and claw back a little bit of our privacy and maybe sanity. This whole agentic AI movement scares the crap out of me. Like, this is Skynet. Like, did we not watch the movies, right? I mean, it just seems like that is not something we should ever do, where we give these things agency and then, bad things happen. It just seems like that's the wrong thing to do without some sort of a guardrail or a human gatekeeper before final decisions are made. I know the government says, I think currently, that there's always a human in the kill chain. I hate that term. With UAVs and things, like there's never, like, they don't bomb anybody autonomously. I bet that's not true. But I bet it also won't be. If it is now, it won't be forever. These things scare the hell out of me. I assume they do to you too.
Yeah, they scare me too. And first, there's a question of like, are they telling the truth or not? But even if they are, a human in the loop plus an AI isn't always better than just a human. Because we tend to defer to authority and we tend to see AI as authority. And furthermore, when there are high stakes, if you go against the AI and it goes wrong, you're going to have to pay the price. If you go with the AI and it goes wrong, you can say like, well, to the best of my knowledge, in that moment, it seemed like a good idea. And so I'm afraid that having a human in whatever responsibility chain we have, in the way we're building AI, is just having a human rubber stamp the AI. And that's not helpful.
Right.
And you're right. It's very scary, even if we think of AI as being very accurate and sophisticated. But when you actually use AI and realize that it's not that accurate and it's not that sophisticated, it's even more terrifying. Like OpenAI, just like a few weeks ago, if I remember correctly, tried to give autonomy to a vending machine. And it went horribly wrong. And that's a vending machine. And we want to use these things in justice and in policing. And what are we smoking here?
Yeah.
I think when you're growing up, you have this illusion that there are grown-ups in the room and that like somebody's driving the bus. And what I tell my students is like, I'm really sorry to tell you, but there's no grown-up in the room and no one's driving this bus. So like, you better get your act together because, sorry, I know that you're 18, but like these guys are not safe. I'm telling you.
Well, and I think you said this before when we talked that you have hope in your students because you're seeing it. And I've seen it in my daughters as well. And they're 25 and 23 at this point. But I hope that there is sort of a techlash amongst the youngsters, that the kids today, that they're looking at these things and starting to shun some of these things and realizing that there's more to life than what you can experience through a screen. And I worry that we don't have the social interactions that we used to. And I'm hoping that the younger generation is trying to break out of this digital maze that we put ourselves in.
And here's something else that gives me hope. I really do think, obviously I'm biased, I'm an author, I love books, but I really do think that reading a paper book has become the ultimate act of defiance. And it has been the ultimate act of defiance for a long time. You know, when we started having a book market, there were a lot of arguments for how it would be very dangerous because, you know, people would be exposed to all kinds of ideas. And in particular, women. It was thought it was very dangerous for a woman to read by themselves. At the beginning, the tradition was to read out loud and in community, but to read by yourself was an act of defiance of authority because then the authority lied with you to decide what you think. And when you read a paper book, you're not connected to the screen. Nobody is tracking you. You know, they're not, if it's a paper book, it's not tracking how fast you read or what you highlight or what you share. You're in silence. And that creates exactly the kind of space that fosters autonomy, that strengthens autonomy. And more books are being read today than, you know, some years ago. The book sales are going up. And that gives me hope. If you want to defy the digital and really create a sphere for yourself of privacy, of focus, of well-being, of interesting thoughts, of exposing yourself to interesting ideas and other people, read a book.
And one last snippet that has to do with AI, and agentic AI at that. But I was talking to Eamonn Maguire from Proton, who's the head of their AI department, or the makers of the Lumo chatbot, which is very privacy-oriented, and they're doing some really amazing work there. As best you can with this technology. It's really hard to make it 100% private because at some point you have to process the clear text. Doing end-to-end encryption is difficult. And if you're curious about that and didn't hear the episode with Eamonn, you should definitely go back and check it out. But anyway, I, again, expressed my reservations about agentic AI and where he thinks we are in kind of the overall development cycle of AI. And this is what he had to say. Are there any major efficiency gains or have we kind of exhausted at this point? Are we just kind of tweaking around the edges and the main functionality of LLMs is pretty much there?
Yeah. I mean, it's a chatbot. I mean, the privacy side is extending beyond the LLM, I would say. You know, we talked before about the LLM is one part, and then you've got the application on top of that, and you've got the servers, and you've got so on. But the other part now, which is, of course, topical, is agentic AI.
Yes.
And agentic AI opens the space bigger than it was before, right? So, you know, it's one thing is if you're giving your information to a chatbot and it's doing whatever. The other thing is if you're using this LLM and it's connected to your bank, or it's connected to, you know, it's got the API keys to open bank, or it's got your API keys to book stuff on travel websites or to look what you did in the past. Or to, you know, go into your Google Calendar or your Proton Calendar or whatever you're going to do and start
or social
doing
media,
things for you.
Yeah.
Or social media,
all these integrations, right?
Basically, and then even that's not even getting into the fact that you've got integration into your machine. Right? You know, you've got the ability that it can just call things. It can execute bash scripts. It can open windows inside your Chrome or Brave browser or whatever you're doing, and all these things are. I mean, they're external to the LLM in some way, but it's part of the ecosystem that's being built. And a lot of people are moving very fast for fear of missing out, but they haven't really fully understood, and no one really understands what is the the true implication of what's being done at present, right? How much is it opening people up? And in this age where, I mean, there's basically a big privacy breach or data breach every day. There's, we've got Jaguar Land Rover now in the UK, which were shut down for weeks.
Right.
We've got Marks and Spencer's, Co-op. All these companies they were relatively locked down, I would say. But now all these big companies are just opening up their whole ecosystem to agentic AI. And I'm not saying it's not a bad thing in itself, but I think that people are moving too fast without fully considering, the security implications. So yeah, here we focus a lot on the privacy aspect, but a key part of Proton is of course making sure there's security, because even if if someone got onto our servers, they wouldn't be able to get anything anyway. We still would never want anyone getting onto our servers because it would be not great, right?
Sure.
You don't really want people poking around inside your house, even if you have nothing inside the house. It's still like a violation in that respect. But I think, I've got very long thoughts about agentic AI. I'm in favor of parts of it when it's constrained and you can ensure that it's not going to go beyond its boundaries. But when I read these things about people hooking it up into their home systems, where their webcams are plugged in, where it could be just siphoning data wherever, it's like really no one knows what's being done. I think maybe people just want to, they want to see what happens.
Sure.
It's like just burn it all down and see what happens. But I don't know, but for me, looking at the current state of things, it's like every technology cycle, right? You have a hype cycle, and then you've got the trough of disillusionment. And then you've got
sure. It's a bubble.
And, we're at multiple bubbles at the same time within the same scope, right? So you've got the bubble you have an AI bubble with LLMs. You've got the AI bubble with the agentic side, which is tangential, but somewhat, it's a little bit different. In these bubbles, there's always going to be the point where people realize, well, yeah, it didn't really work the way I was expecting it to, because, all the marketing stuff before that kind of built it up so much that you can only fall from that. If you sell a product to a company saying this agentic AI will do all your tasks for you and you'll have no more employees anymore, people will be jumping at it, right? Because they say, yeah, cool.
Right.
But then if it gives away all your IP, you basically just opened up all your gateways to every hacker under the sun, and at the end you have no business left because no one was really thinking about things whenever they did it.
Yeah.
Then maybe you deserve to fail at that point.
All right, one last clip before we go, and this was from a pretty recent interview that I did with the Cyber Resilience Corps, the CRC, and it was a large panel discussion. We had 4 people representing different aspects of that program and the volunteer organizations trying to help our critical infrastructure be more resilient. And I asked them about personal OPSEC, personal ways to be more resilient. And Grace, Menna, and Adrien Ogee had a couple great suggestions.
So I will shout out, and it probably isn't as helpful if there has already been a massive incident, but Take 9 is a public service awareness campaign put on by the Craig Newmark Philanthropy that is essentially equipping regular individuals to take a couple of basic steps to help secure themselves and their communities. And so you can read more about the steps to take on pausetake9.org. It's a really, really great website and resource to share with maybe, your friends and family who have no cybersecurity awareness, your grandmother, your grandfather that, maybe struggle even to figure out how to use their email account. I know mine do. I sent my grandmother Pause Take 9 a couple of weeks ago, and she still struggles to figure out how to open up her own browser. So I think, right, thinking through who in your community is best situated to learn what skills and meeting people where they're at. And Pause Take 9 is a great place to start for folks that have very, very little knowledge about cybersecurity and cyber hygiene.
All right.
We recommend to people who have high-risk profiles to look into personal OPSEC guidelines for cybersecurity issues Now, if you're talking about large-scale crises affecting your, healthcare providers or your water systems and whatnot, then, personal OPSEC on cyber is not going to be all that relevant. And so perhaps one fun thing that was the talk of the conference at DEF CON this summer was Meshtastic. I don't know if you've covered that already in the show.
Yes.
But I've got a few devices here.
I've been playing around with it actually a little bit. There's no nodes around me, but yeah, I've got 3 devices. They're all mine.
There you go. Well, you're the first node in your area then. And more seriously speaking, in the event of a natural disaster or something that affects your ability to communicate with others, having those devices and being able to get a few pings from people and so that they can let you know if things are better somewhere else. If people are not proficient with radio hams, I think is the right term.
Ham radio.
That can be an easy way to enter into the wonderful topic of self-run networks.
All right, so there you have it. Some choice clips from my bonus podcast content, normally only available to my patrons. And just thought I'd give you a little taste of what you're missing. And I will be doing a new patron promotion in January. But if you do become a patron, by the way, you will get access to all the old historical bonus podcast stuff. And there's like 200 some episodes at this point. Lots of stuff to catch up on. If there's been any interviews you really liked, well, there's almost surely going to be a little bonus Q&A from that episode that you can go back and check out as well. So I'm still working out the details, but it's probably going to be very similar to the promotion I did last. I think it was April. Man, I don't do these things that often. So if you're interested in my Dragon Challenge coins, you should go back and check out the previous promotion. If you just search on Dragon coins and look at the most recent one that mentions that, you'll see the details, and that's probably similar to whatever I'm going to be doing in January for the next promotion, which is basically to give away some Dragon coins, at least to people in the United States. It's really expensive to ship these things internationally, so I apologize for that. But for those international folks, I also will probably make available maybe a free PDF copy of my book, that sort of thing, that's a lot easier to deliver digitally. But again, there's a lot of other perks to being a patron. I've got some promo codes that I've gotten from like Malwarebytes and Proton and Safing that you can pick from the quote-unquote treasure chest whenever you sign up annually, which will significantly cover a lot of the cost, by the way. Most of these things are a value of like $40 to $50. So I will be working out those details, and you'll hear more about that when I officially launch it sometime next month. I will also be doing my annual listener survey, and that usually stays open for about a month. And I really do read your feedback, like all of it. So if you have any feedback on the show, things you'd like to see improved, or things you'd like me to do more of, or maybe ideas for other things I could do that I'm not already doing, or guests that you would like me to interview, or topics you'd like me to cover, that's a great time to do it. I love to get feedback. I'm always looking for ways to make the show better. So be on the lookout for that. That'll also be coming out sometime next month. Oh, and I should say, one of the things I do every year from my patrons is I do a video call. We get together and, perhaps have some drinks, and I take Q&A, and we just talk about various subjects. It's usually a small group, actually, because, it's hard to find one time and date that works for a lot of people. But it's a nice little intimate chat that we can have, and that will probably be in early January as well. So it might be, if that's something that would interest you, another reason why you might want to become a patron. So that's going to do it for this week. I hope everyone is enjoying their holiday season, and we have New Year's coming up. So let's be thinking about some New Year's resolutions. I will have some ideas for you coming up soon. But that'll do it for this week. And have a safe and happy New Year's. And until next time, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.